Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT07, and BT07 offers us lots of new and exciting cards to be working with, especially on a budget. So today I'm going to be covering a yellow hybrids deck. Well, it's not exactly a pure yellow hybrids deck, it is yellow hybrids with a splash of purple, and we're only splashing in purple to add some extra control type tools and elements into the deck that we might not have access to otherwise, because yellow on a budget is going to be one of the harder decks to build around just because some of the more important parts and pieces are on the high rarity slot. So with that in mind, onto the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running one copy of DemiMeramon. So this is an optional card, you don't even have to run DemiMeramon, and I do understand that DemiMeramon is going to be one of the more expensive cards in the deck. But what it's doing is it's allowing us to use its on delete ability in combination with our level 3s to be able to draw and discard, allowing us to try to filter through our deck even faster, and we don't necessarily care about setting up our trash for anything, we just want to see as many cards as we possibly can to make the best possible plays. But the main Digitama of this deck is going to be 4 copies of Xiaoman. So Xiaoman is another control type tool for this deck to be using just because its inheritable ability of giving retaliation, as long as we have 10 or more cards in our trash, is really good. So that way we could have whatever level 3 try to swing into the opponent's higher level Digimon if they're suspended, delete that Digimon, trigger our on delete abilities if they have any, and be able to control the fields that way. And then as far as the level 3s go, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gazimon. So Gazimon is that anti-meta card where he's really only in the deck to try to shut off the opponent's memory manipulating shenanigans on anything but their tamer, limiting their options and play lines so that way we could try to slow them down. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Elecmon. So this is another flex spot in the deck. It could be Tapirmon if you really wanted it to be. We're just using this card as a really good level 3 with an on-delete ability we want to try to take advantage of. So what's making Elecmon so good is his on-delete ability where we get to delete one of the opponent's level 3 Digimon. So we could try to use this with Xiaoman to swing, delete one of the opponent's higher level Digimon, and then Elecmon's ability to delete one of the opponent's lower level Digimon, adding some more control elements into the deck just because we don't necessarily have a whole lot of control elements on our top end. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Bokemon. So you can't run a hybrid deck without Bokemon just because Bokemon is that important. He's going to be acting not only as one of the deck's dedicated digging cards and tools, so that way we could try to check the top 5 and add a Digimon that's either a hybrid or a 10 warrior and a tamer from among them into our hand. So again, finding our parts and pieces is really important to help make our deck even more consistent than the opponents at times. And then what we're trying to also use him for is his secondary ability where he's just passively sitting on the field. When you digivolve on top of one of your tamers, then you get to gain 2 memory, so it makes that evolution basically free or super cheap. But speaking of our hybrids, next I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kazemon. So Kazemon is just your stereotypical base hybrid, where all it's doing is allowing us to digivolve it on top of one of our tamers. So that's all we care about, so that way we could try to climb the stages efficiently, especially if we have a Pokemon sitting on the field, and trigger our hybrid abilities on our level 5 slot. And then the last level 4 of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Zephyrmon. So even though Zephyrmon has a whole bunch of different ways on how we could play it, we're really only going to be digivolving it for 2 on top of one of our tamers. We'll seldomly digivolve it for 1 on top of our other level 4, but we need to try to make it the most out of what limited hybrids that we have. And this card has a really good when digivolving ability that we can try to take advantage of, where if it's digivolved on top of a hybrid or a Zoe, then we get to increase the DP of all of our security Digimon by 3,000, trying to make it even harder for the opponent to want to attack into us. Because our DP in our security is increased, they have a higher chance of being deleted if the opponent swings. And that's kind of the subtle sub-theme of what Yellow Hybrids is trying to do, is recovery and increase the DP of our security Digimon, de-incentivizing them from attacking in the first place. Next, on to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of RizeGreymon. So RizeGreymon is a pretty solid card for this deck because it's helping us play our yellow tamers more efficiently than some of the other hybrid-based decks. So when we Digivolve up into him, we get to play a yellow tamer from our hand for free. It won't trigger its on play ability, but that's okay. Just being able to set up a tamer is super important in this deck. And then on top of that, he also has a nice secondary inheritable ability that we want to take advantage of to allow us to try to deal more damage to the opponent and try to close out the game with, just because the deck doesn't really have a whole lot of ways of dealing extra damage. So when we have 3 or more yellow tamers in play, then whatever Digimon he's Digivolving up into will have security attack +1 to hit even harder with. But as far as the main level 5 that we want to be using, 4 copies of Jet Sylphimon. So Jet Sylphimon is absolutely insane because, well, in this style of deck, we're almost always going to be evoing it for 1, because to reduce its evolution cost by 2, we have to Digivolve it on top of a tamer stack. So that means going from our tamer to our level 4 to Jet Sylphimon will be making Jet Sylphimon even easier to play, and we definitely want to play it and use its ability because it's when Digivolving ability. When Digivolving on top of a hybrid, which all of our level 4s are hybrids, will allow us to recover 1, no restrictions or requirements attached. So just that blanket recovery just helps us stay in the game even longer, so that way we could try to fill up our security with some threats or gain some additional resources for trying to bait the opponent into hitting us. And then as far as the level 6s go, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Seraphimon. So this is the classic collection version of Seraphimon, and this card is just doing everything that the deck wants to do, just because when we Digivolve into it, it has another recovery that doesn't have any restrictions or requirements, so we could just recover a lot by just straight up Digivolving all the way up our chain. And then on top of that, this card also has a nice secondary ability that's playing along with what Yellow Hybrids wants to do. So it has a nice ability during the opponent's turn. If this card is suspended, then all of your security Digimon gain plus 5,000 DP, further increasing the DP amount that your security Digimon will have, making it again even more threatening for the opponent to attack into your security, especially since we have multiple ways to keep recovering. And then the last level 6 of the deck is going to be Magnadrumon. So this is the classic collection version of Magnadrumon, and this is going to be the main aggro card that we're going to be using. So this could be any other yellow mega that wants to be aggressive, but I think for how the deck wants to be played, this is a really solid card to use, especially on a budget. So it has a nice when Digivolving ability where we get to trash the top card of our security stack to be able to unsuspend this Digimon. And then on top of that, it also has a nice ability that triggers when it attacks once per turn. If we have 3 or fewer cards in our security, then we get to recover 1, even adding to the amount of cards that we could try to recover with. And then as far as the options go, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Schwartz Lizards. So Schwartz Lizards is going to be the main control type tool that we're going to be using, just because for each of our hybrids and tamers in play, we get to delete one of the opponent's level 5 or lower Digimon. So if they're building up a wide board or they're swinging aggressively with level 5s, then we have a very easy and efficient way to deal with it. And because we are playing some purple eggs and purple tamers, it makes this card even easier to want to use. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Blinding Ray because this is for all intents and purposes the hammer spark of the deck. We're just using this to gain some instant memory to be able to make some more powerful plays with when we need to. Granted, we don't necessarily like burning ourselves, but we have so much recovery, even on a budget, that we could still afford to use a little bit, just because that instant memory gain could make or break certain lines of play. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Reinforced Memory Boost because, well, we're only allowed to run 1 copy, and this card is still just that good. So it's allowing us to look at the top 2 cards of our deck. 1 goes into our hand, 1 goes into our security, then Reinforced Memory Boost goes onto the field, so that way we could use its delay ability to gain some instant memory at a later turn, making this card just super powerful because it's just doing a lot for what we're trying to do. And then the last option of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Wyvern's Breath. So Wyvern's Breath is, for all intents and purposes, the Gaia Force of the deck. We're just using this as our single target big body removal for the cards that Schwartz Lizard can't necessarily deal with the security ability of also being able to activate its main, so that way it's going to be a threat no matter when and how we use it. And then as far as the tamers go, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Matt Ishida. So this is the BT02 Matt Ishida, and this is going to be one of the more expensive cards in the deck because it's going to be a memory fixing tamer. So the primary purpose of this card is to act as a purple source and to help fix our memory. So if our memory is ever less than 3, he'll just always hard set us to 3, and we could actually try to use his on play ability to recycle some of our Digimon and options, which are all pretty decent, so that way we have more cards to be able to play with. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of TK Inkari. So TK Inkari is one of the most important tamers in this deck because this is a huge deterrent for the opponent to want to attack into us because of its ability where at the start of our turn, if we have fewer security cards than our opponent, then we get to gain it to memory. So that's kind of why we also want to deal a little bit of damage to ourselves, so that way we could trigger our TK Inkaris ourselves instead of waiting for the opponent to do it for us. So that way we could have lots of memory to work with to make a very powerful push turn. And then on top of that, it also adds some extra control elements into the deck, where we get to suspend the card when we attack with one of our yellow Digimon to minus 1000 DP to one of the opponent's Digimon for the turn, and this does stack, so the more TK Inkaris you have, the more powerful both of these abilities become. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Zoe. So Zoe is going to be the primary tamer that we want to use to digivolve into our hybrids with, just because, well, she has a really good on-play ability for when we actually do play her to help dig out our hybrids and 10 warriors from our security. So we're using our security as a resource to gain information and cards from, and then we get to recover if we did take one. But its inheritable ability is also pretty good because it has that during the opponent's turn, all of our security Digimon gain plus 3000 DP to make our security Digimon even more threatening, which is playing on theme with how everything in this deck wants to be functioning. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 3 copies of TK. So this is kind of a flex spot, so it could be Kari if you wanted it to be, but I just like what TK is doing because TK is fitting on theme with, again, how we want to have yellow hybrids function. So it has the ability where during the opponent's turn, all of our security Digimon get plus 2000 DP. So again, with all of our instances of DP boosting during the opponent's turn for our security, it can make our security Digimon very, very threatening. Even on our weak at level 3s coming out of security, they could still be somewhat threatening with all of these boosts. And then the other reason why I really like the starter deck TK is because he's also an easy tamer to hard play, so we don't necessarily feel bad about digivolving him into a hybrid just because he was easy to play, and the boost, while it's nice, sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter all of the time just because we're not necessarily running a whole lot of Digimon, but we're still running some to want to take advantage of this ability. And then there's still just a lot of room for changes, customization, and flexibility on what we want to gain out of our yellow hybrids deck. So on a budget, if you do want to incorporate some of the promos that came in BT07, then we do have some really solid yellow promos to work with in the form of Ophanimon as some extra control tools to try to DP reduce the opponent's Digimon and delete them that way. And we also have the promo Seraphimon to try to help keep ourselves alive by constantly recovering, because this is acting similar to all of the other Seraphimons, except it also has an on-delete ability to allow us to recover even more, so that's just pretty decent at trying to keep our security as full as it possibly can. But we do have a yellow base that we could be playing with just because we still would want to play the purple package, and we could run purple tamers to be able to run more purple cards. So Upamon could be used to help draw some cards when our security is low, and Salamon is a good card to pair up with Upamon because it's a nice easy level 3 that we could use its on delete ability to try to help recover us even more. Then if we do want to be a little bit more aggressive, we could also splash in some Bushi Agumon just because of how TK and Kari work. We could sit on them and then just have a whole bunch of memory to do a very powerful push turn with, and Bushi Agumon is a good game finisher to try to close out the game or deal some extra damage out of nowhere because of his rush ability. Then we even have the Lucimon package that we could think about playing around with just because, well, we're already splashing a little bit of purple, and Lucimon in both purple and yellow want to recover and control the field with Dead or Alive to tie it all together with. And speaking of being able to play Lucimon, we even have Dynasmon to try to help fill up our trash and dig out our parts and pieces to make Lucimon plays more consistent, or just make our deck a little bit more consistent as a whole, because while he's just passively sitting on the field, he could even help keep our security as full as possible with his ability to constantly recover as long as we're put under a certain threshold. And speaking of recovery, we also have the BT01 Seraphimon to help us recover and deal some extra damage because he could possibly have security attack +1, and damage output is kind of low in this deck, so any way we have to deal some extra damage is really, really good to try to close out the game with. And speaking of extra damage and trying to close out the game, we even could think about running Kazuchimon just because, well, he also can have some extra damage for us, and when we're low on our security, he could also help recover us quite a lot. Then, as another control type tool for us to be using, we could be playing around with RizeGreymon from BT02, just because, well, RizeGreymon can help wipe the field for us just literally having a field full of yellow tamers, which is essentially what Yellow Hybrids wants to do at the end of the day anyway. But if you do want to run some level 7s, you could think about running Kazemon Volderarm on a budget, just because it's a very budget-friendly SR level 7, so once we're done with whatever we're doing off of our level 6s, then we could just go up into an easy Kazemon Volderarm for another control and removal tool. But obviously, the main intended purpose of how this deck wants to be played is with Susanomon to not only just help refill our deck, but we could Digivolve him on top of one of our tamers, so that way we have easy access to a level 7, and he's going to be able to deal lots of damage relatively quickly with security attack +2 and delete one of the opponent's Digimon, so he is the best level 7 that this deck could hope for. And then we do have some other really cute and cheeky option cards like Holy Flame to try to stop the opponent from dealing damage, so we could stall out the game even longer. And then we have some other purple tamers that we want to be running. The main one that we would want to run is going to be Kari because it's synergizing with our security and how we're using our security to help us gain some memory, or to gain some memory on the opponent's turn to turn off some of their potential aggression. And then there is no better memory fixing tamer in this deck than TK, but I understand TK is a little bit more on the pricier side in terms of actually picking him up as a single, so we could try to play around him, which is what the deck kind of does, but he's still just that important of a card because he's adding some extra consistency. He's removing cards from our security and putting them back in, which just allows us to use various different abilities easier, and he's just a good card in general. But for the most part, this is just my interpretation of what a budget Yellow Hybrids deck is going to be looking like. I do think that the purple splash is really nice to try to help flesh out and round out the deck in terms of everything that it's trying to do, just because we don't necessarily have the best tools, because a lot of their good tools are on higher rarities or are relatively expensive because there's no real replacement for them. I wasn't super thrilled with including the mats just because he's already like $5 a card as of the recording of this video, so that kind of does drive the price of the deck up, and if you wanted to pick up the deck singles wise, this deck should theoretically cost you around $40-ish, depending on where you go and when you're buying it. But it still is going to be a really fun and interesting deck with lots of exploration to be held, just because of what Yellow Hybrids is trying to do and the different sub-themes that Yellow and Purple could be playing with as a whole. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.